My sister-in-law said it across the rehearsal dinner table, loud enough for 40 people to hear. 32 and still no ring, haven't figured out your life yet? My whole family laughed, so I set down my fork and said, "Funny you mention figuring things out, because I'm the one who's been figuring out how to pay for this entire wedding while you two figured out how to spend it." Nobody laughed after that, and that was the night everything I had been quietly carrying finally hit the floor. My name doesn't matter as much as what happened. What matters is that I'm 32 years old. I live in a one-bedroom apartment in Denver, Colorado, and for the last 6 years I have been the financial backbone of a family that publicly treated me like a cautionary tale. I work as a senior data analyst at a logistics company downtown. I got the position at 24, right out of grad school, and built myself up the slow, unglamorous way. No big purchases, no lifestyle creep, just steady contributions to a 401(n) I was genuinely proud of, and a savings account I treated like a second job. My salary isn't extravagant by Denver standards, but it was enough. It was more than enough, until it became a shared resource that nobody asked my permission to share. My father ran a landscaping business for 20 years. Some years were good, some weren't. But it worked, until a back injury in 2020 knocked him off his feet for 8 months, and the business fell apart quietly while he recovered. When the dust cleared, there was $14,000 in contractor debt and a line of credit maxed to its limit. My mother called me on a Saturday morning in February, voice too calm in the way that precedes crying. I transferred the money before the call ended. My father said thank you once. My mother said she knew she could count on me. Neither of them ever brought it up again, as if it had happened to someone else entirely. My brother, 2 years younger, the one the family stories center around, had a different kind of problem. He has always been charming in a way that gets him into situations and gets other people to clean up after them. He dropped out of community college after a year, cycled through restaurant jobs, moved back home at 23. I paid his car insurance for 18 months so he could keep getting to work. When he finally got his own apartment, I co-signed his lease, which meant I was legally responsible when he came up short on rent 3 separate times over the following year and a half. Each time he called me instead of our parents. He said I was the one who actually understood money. What he meant was I was the one who actually had it, and he had already tested the limits of what our parents could absorb. Then he met his fiancée and decided he was ready to grow up, as long as someone else paid for the parts of growing up that required a credit card. She came from a family with very particular ideas about weddings. My brother had very particular ideas about impressing them. The venue they chose, a converted barn event space outside Boulder, cost $8,500 just to rent for the day. The catering contract ran another $11,200. The photographer was $3,200, the florist, $1,800. And then there were the rehearsal dinner deposits and the honeymoon down payment and the miscellaneous vendors my brother forwarded me in casual emails, the way you forward someone a link to something they've agreed to buy. Over 8 months, I transferred $26,400 toward that wedding. I kept a spreadsheet because some part of me, without fully acknowledging it, understood I was going to need documentation one day. I want to say clearly, I was happy for my brother. I wanted him to have a good wedding, and I believe that was true at the time. What I did not want was to be seated at table 9, wedged between the restrooms and a decorative hay bale, next to an elderly great-uncle who dozed through most of the cocktail hour, while my sister-in-law delivered toasts about building a life with the right person, and nobody seemed to notice the irony that the person funding the life being built was sitting alone next to the bathrooms. But the rehearsal dinner was where it became impossible to ignore. We were 3 courses in. My sister-in-law was telling a story about a woman from her Pilates studio who was perpetually single and how sad it was that some people just couldn't seem to get it together. She wasn't looking at me when she started the story. Then she was. 32 and still no ring. she said, tilting her head with the particular smile people use when they want credit for being charming while saying something mean. Haven't figured out your life yet? My mother laughed, not the polite kind, the genuine kind, the kind that means she found it funny. My father gave a small confirming nod. My brother swirled his wine glass and said nothing, which has always been his way of participating without accountability. The future in-laws smiled uncertainly, sensing a current they didn't fully understand. Something very old and very quiet in me made a calculation. 6 years, $14,000 for my father's debt, 18 months of car insurance, 3 rounds of emergency rent, $26,000 for this wedding alone. A Portugal trip I had canceled and rescheduled and canceled again. A long-term disability upgrade I kept deferring because there was always something more urgent, always a shortfall somewhere, always a call. I set my fork down carefully on the edge of my plate. Funny you mention figuring things out, I said. My voice came out steady. Not cold, not loud, just steady, which surprised me. Because I'm the one who's been figuring out how to pay for this wedding. All of it, while you two were figuring out how to spend it. The table went quiet the way a room does when something falls and everyone freezes to assess the damage. My sister-in-law opened her mouth. My brother touched her arm. My mother looked at her dinner plate as if something fascinating had appeared on it. My father stared at me with an expression I can only describe as startled, the look of someone who suddenly remembers that a quiet person has a voice. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, and said, "I hope the rest of the evening is lovely." Then I excused myself to the restroom, stood in the stall for 4 minutes with my hands pressed against the cool tile wall, breathing deliberately, and made a decision that had been forming for 6 years without being named. That night I drove back to my apartment and sat at the kitchen table in the dark for a long time. Not angry, exactly. Something colder than angry. Something that had stopped asking permission to exist. I canceled the final scheduled transfer, $3,100 for the rehearsal dinner balance, and a stack of miscellaneous vendor invoices my brother had forwarded with no comment, no gratitude, no question mark, as if my bank account were simply a department in his household's finance office. I moved the money into an account my family didn't know I had. I'd opened it 6 months earlier without a clear reason, just a slow instinct that I needed a place that was entirely mine. The messages started the next morning. My mother, "We need to talk about last night." My brother, "That was embarrassing. You made her cry." My sister-in-law, who apparently had my number, "I hope you're proud of yourself." My father called once and left 3 minutes of pointed silence with words scattered through it. Family, responsibility, not the time or the place. I read every message. I didn't respond to any of them. I was not prepared for what came next. 10 days after the rehearsal dinner, I was at my desk eating lunch when a fraud alert email came in from Discover. A personal loan application had been submitted in my name. $38,000. I put down my fork. I called Discover's fraud line, then Experian. Then I pulled all 3 of my credit reports within the same hour, sitting at my kitchen counter with the phone on speaker and my laptop open and my hands not entirely steady. The application had been submitted 5 days after the rehearsal dinner, using my social security number, my Denver address, and my employer information. Information I had given my brother 2 years earlier when I co-signed his lease. Information I had handed over in a signed document because he was my brother, and I assumed that meant something. The application had been declined. I held on to that fact like something solid. But the hard inquiry was on my report, and the information used was exact. Same income figure, same employer name, same phone number I reserved specifically for financial documents. There was no other explanation that made sense, and I wasn't going to pretend there was. I sat very still. I thought about Portugal, the trip I'd canceled at 29 because my father needed that same window of money, the trip I'd promised myself I would reschedule and never had. I thought about a man I'd dated briefly 2 years ago who told me, after 3 quiet months, that he didn't think I was ever fully there, that something always seemed to be pulling at me from somewhere else. He wasn't wrong. I was always managing something that wasn't mine. I had structured my entire adult life around availability to a family that had just submitted a fraudulent loan application in my name 5 days after publicly laughing at me. That evening, I called a lawyer. Her name was Quinn. A friend of a colleague had used her for a financial fraud case and called her precise and calm. Her office was in Lodo, small and well organized, the kind of space where problems become manageable by virtue of being written down correctly. I laid out everything across her desk: the fraud alert, the credit inquiry report, the cosigner lease documents, 6 years of bank transfer records I'd exported that same afternoon, and the spreadsheet I'd kept without knowing why. Quinn read without interrupting. Then she looked up. "This is identity fraud," she said. "The application being declined doesn't reduce his culpability or your exposure. He used your personal identifying information to apply for credit without your knowledge or consent. That is a federal offense." I said the thing I had known I would say, and already resented myself for: "He's my brother." Quinn nodded once, the way people nod when they've heard something many times and still take it seriously. "I understand. And the relationship doesn't change what the law identifies as having happened. What it might affect is how you choose to respond, but you should know clearly what your options are. You have grounds to file a police report, a complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and a civil suit for damages. You should also freeze your credit with all 3 bureaus immediately tonight and change every password associated with your financial accounts." I left her office with a folder of numbered steps and the clearest head I'd had in 10 days. The family pressure came in waves, the way it always had, shifting register, shifting tone, looking for the angle that would work. My mother called every day for 2 weeks. Some calls were grieving. She was crying. She didn't understand why I was doing this. This was supposed to be a happy time in our family. Some calls were firm. I was being selfish. I was punishing everyone for one mistake. Did I understand how much stress I was putting on the wedding? My father left 2 more voicemails, heavy with disappointment and short on specifics. My brother sent 11 texts over 3 days: denial, then accusation, then something that was almost an explanation but kept stopping one sentence short of an apology. The closest he got was, "I just needed a bridge loan. It didn't even go through. I was going to pay it back." I was going to pay it back. I had said that to myself silently every time I transferred money to this family. I was going to be repaid. We all tell ourselves the version of the story we can live with. I did not go back for a family dinner. I want to say that plainly, because I know the pull of it. The familiar table, the smell of the house, the hope that sitting down together will somehow process everything into something that hurts less. I had sat at that table my whole life. I knew every mark on it. But I also knew that the last time I sat there, my family laughed at a joke about my life, while I was the person paying their bills. I was not going to go back and hand them that opportunity again. Quinn sent a formal letter to my brother. It detailed the unauthorized use of my identifying information, the fraudulent loan application, and the legal exposure he faced. It gave him 30 days to provide written confirmation of all instances in which my personal information had been accessed or used, and to demonstrate that the data had not been shared beyond its original purpose. My mother called the night the letter arrived. Her voice had changed. Quieter, the particular quiet of someone who has realized something real is happening. "He told us about the letter," she said. "Honey, can't we just keep this in the family?" "Mom," I said. It was the first word I'd spoken to her in 12 days. "He typed my social security number into a loan application." A long pause. "He was going to put the money back," she said softly. "That's what everyone says," I told her. And then I hung up, slowly, and sat with the guilt and the grief and the steadiness underneath both of them. The ground had not disappeared. It was actually more solid than it had been in years. Quinn filed the CFPB complaint. We submitted documentation to Discover's Fraud Investigation Unit. My brother, now facing actual legal proceedings, retained his own attorney, funded by sources I genuinely cannot account for, and within 3 weeks his lawyer reached out to negotiate. The hard inquiry was removed from my credit report. He signed a written statement acknowledging that he had accessed and used my personal identifying information without authorization. He agreed to repay $200 in documentation fees and legal costs on a structured schedule. He did not apologize. I had not expected him to. The wedding happened without me. My mother texted a photo. My brother and his wife, outside the Boulder barn, in golden hour light. Everyone smiling. I looked at it for a moment. I felt something, but it was quieter and more complicated than I'd expected. Mostly, I felt like someone who had stopped running and was just standing somewhere, breathing normally for the first time in a long time. In the months that followed, I learned what it felt like to keep my own money. It sounds like it should feel obvious. It didn't. My first paycheck after I stopped the transfers felt strange, too full, like I'd picked up an object without remembering how heavy it was supposed to be. I sat with my bank balance that first month just looking at it. It grew. That was new. I hired a financial advisor named Priya who worked specifically with women rebuilding financial independence. In our first session, I told her the full number, $43,800 over 6 years, not counting the smaller amounts I'd given without tracking. She didn't flinch. She said, "Okay, here's where we start." We started. I took the Portugal trip. 11 days in October, Lisbon, the Alentejo, a few days in Porto. I ate a pastel de nata standing up in a bakery near the Alfama at 8 in the morning and walked down to the Tagus and sat by the water for 2 hours doing nothing that needed to be done. I cried a little, by the river, for reasons I couldn't entirely name. For time, maybe. For the version of the last 6 years that might have existed if I'd learned to say no before someone forced my hand. But I didn't stay in that feeling. I had made choices. My family had made worse ones. And I was making different ones now. At work, something opened up. Without the low-grade financial anxiety that had been living in my chest like a second heartbeat for 6 years, I could focus differently, more fully, more ambitiously. I took on a data infrastructure audit that had stalled under 3 previous analysts and finished it in 8 weeks. My manager pulled me aside after my presentation. He said it was the most thorough analysis the department had produced in years. A few weeks later, there was a promotion conversation we both understood was coming. There was also Reed, a structural engineer who had moved into the apartment 2 floors up from mine in September. I met him first in the elevator, and then on the building's rooftop on a Friday evening when we were both there for no particular reason, except that it was a good night to be somewhere with a view. He was quiet in the way that signals someone is listening and not just waiting to talk. We ended up standing out there for 2 hours. I told him some of what had happened. Not everything, but enough. He didn't perform sympathy. He said, "It sounds like you've been the adult in that family for a long time." I said yes. He said, "That's a heavy thing to finally put down." I said it was, but I was getting used to the weight of my own life instead. We've had dinner several times since then. I don't know what it becomes. But for the first time in years, something good doesn't feel like something I have to postpone. My mother texted 3 months after the wedding. She said she missed me. She said she knew things had gotten complicated and she hoped we could find our way back. I read it several times because the difficult thing about families, even ones that have failed you in specific documentable ways, is that the love doesn't always empty out when the trust does. It gets tangled up in it. I still haven't replied. I'm not sure yet what I want to say, or whether saying it will cost me something I'm not willing to pay again. What I know is that I am not going back to being what I was, the person who absorbed every shortfall, every emergency, Every decision made by someone who assumed the floor would hold no matter how many times they tested it. I am done being the floor. I'm at my kitchen table right now, October light coming in sideways, the Rockies visible through the window in the particular purple they turn at this hour. I have coffee and a clear calendar and a savings account that is growing for the first time in 6 years. The financial advisor and I are modeling what a down payment on a condo looks like by next spring. There's a sentence I keep coming back to, not because someone told it to me, but because I found it myself, sitting in a bathroom stall at a rehearsal dinner with my hands flat against the tile. The people who love you do not use your silence as a budget line. And your willingness to give is not a contract that obligates you to keep giving until there is nothing left of yourself to give from. I am 32 years old. I have my own money, my own plans, my own life that belongs entirely to me. And I am just beginning to understand what to do with all of it.